Thank you for choosing Whispering with Pineapple to listen to stories. For each series, I will release two versions, Vietnamese and English. If anyone wants to practice passive English listening, you can choose the English version. If there are any mistakes during the translation process, I hope everyone will give feedback and I will take it into account. I've also included the text version below for your reference.
I first came to know the meaning of the word dream on a scorching summer day when I was 8 years old. Back then, my elementary school organized a field trip for third graders. The destination was Ha Long Bay. It was the first trip of my life without my mother holding my hand, without having to ride my father's rickety bicycle, and not heading to my paternal hometown with its rice fields and spotted dogs. I still vividly remember the feeling of sitting on a double-decker tourist bus for the first time, something that, to a child born and raised in a small town, felt like a dream straight out of the TV show We Are Soldiers. Each student received a uniform cap and a small name tag to hang on their chest. I was so clumsy that I dropped mine on the bus floor and had to awkwardly pick it up amid the giggles of my classmates. But when the tour guide stepped onto the bus, everything fell into silence. She wore a flowing sky blue AO dye, her hair neatly tied up high. Even without a microphone, her voice was clear, confident, and full of charisma. The way she introduced the history of Ha Long Bay had me, an 8-year-old who couldn't yet distinguish between legend and fact, sitting wide-eyed and hanging on to her every word. I remember my gaze at that moment. Bright, eager, as if the world had suddenly expanded 100-fold. The entire bus ride, I couldn't take my eyes off her. In my young mind, being a tour guide was something magical. You got to travel to many places, didn't need to pay, could speak beautifully, receive applause, and stand in front of so many people without trembling. When she pointed out the window, introducing the drum and hen islets and the mysterious caves-like scenes from a painting, I turned to my friend next to me and whispered, "I want to be like her." My friend smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Then do it when you grow up." I nodded, an innocent but determined nod. That was probably the first time in my life I felt there was something I truly wanted to reach for. Not because of my parents' expectations, not because of grades or exams, but because I genuinely liked it. I liked it so much that when I got home, I eagerly grabbed pen and paper and wrote in my diary, "When I grow up, I will become a tour guide. I'll travel around the world. People will clap every time I speak." I showed the diary to my mother. She just smiled and patted my head. "That's a beautiful dream, sweetheart. But being a tour guide is hard, it's not like the shows on TV. Just dream for now, you'll understand when you grow up." I didn't understand. Nor did I want to. I just nodded and tucked the diary away in my desk drawer, like stashing away a tiny treasure. Years later, I came to realize, not every road comes with a sign. Some dreams are buried under the weight of survival. Some childhood wishes fade away like chalk dust at the end of a school day. But there are things that, even after all these years, when I close my eyes, I can still see clearly, the eyes of that 8-year-old girl, sparkling, pure, and full of belief, and I always wonder, if I give up what that little girl once dreamed of, then in the end, who am I really living for? Back then, after a third-grade field trip, I made up my mind about a dream. Not to be a doctor, a teacher, or an engineer like the other kids usually wrote on the future career form our homeroom teacher handed out. I wanted to become a tour guide. A profession that sounded so unfamiliar to children from a rural village like me, yet it made my heart flutter for many years afterward. From that day on, I began my own little journey. Every day, I stood in front of the mirror, holding a wooden comb or the TV remote, anything that could pretend to be a microphone, and imagined myself standing in front of a group of tourists, passionately telling stories about ancient relics, rolling mountains, or winding rivers. As blue and graceful as paintings. I trained my voice to be clear and articulate, imitating the way that tour guides spoke back then. Sometimes, right at the climax of my imaginary speech, my mother would walk past my room and hear her daughter chattering alone, then chuckle, "Touette's acting again?" I didn't answer, just smiled secretly and continued my one-woman show. Once, my father brought home a new rice cooker. While he was still fumbling with foam packaging and plastic wires, I quickly snatched the instruction manual. I read it as if it were an ancient script, then stood in the kitchen and delivered a presentation, clear and thorough, about how to use the 3 functions: cook, reheat, and keep warm. My parents sat eating dinner, nodding in approval as their daughter spoke like the wind. And my heart felt strangely warm. That once distant dream now had form, had sound, even smiles and encouraging glances. I started studying harder, no longer fearing math or literature. I grew to love geography, fascinated by names like Angkor Wat, the Eiffel Tower, or the Mongolian steppes. Every time I came across a new land, I'd secretly jot it down in a notebook, what I called the map of places I'll go. A thick notebook carefully wrapped in old newspaper, as if that little dream needed to be protected in a cloak of time. Back then, I didn't know how harsh the outside world could be. I simply believed that if I tried hard enough, I would get to where I wanted to be. That dream was pure, complete, and clear, like the look in my eyes every time a travel program aired on TV. Just like the first time I heard that tour guide speak about golden sun, blue seas, and kind-hearted people in a distant land, I too wanted someone to listen to me like that one day. The younger me didn't know that the future could change. I only knew that every afternoon, after finishing my homework, I'd stand in front of the mirror once more. Look at myself, smile, and say, "My name is Hatuet. Today, I'll take you to a truly special place." I got into university, hotel and tourism management, at University X. I still remember the day I received the news. I cried. Not the dramatic, tear-soaked kind of crying you see in high school dramas, but the quiet kind. Alone in my room. The kind of tears that matched the nights I stayed up late studying in silence, practicing my speech until my throat went dry, or dreaming of endless fields I would one day get to introduce to others. Starting from my second year, I began my internship. Not in some glamorous position, just a tour assistant intern. The one who wakes up at 3 a.m., helps load luggage, prepares water for guests, checks the list, and often steps back to observe the main tour guide at work. Those unnamed tasks filled nearly every hour of the day. I've woken up in the middle of the night to finalize itineraries, waited in the rain in a thin jacket for the group, and kept smiling even when my legs ache after 5 straight hours of walking. But not once did I feel discouraged. I remember how my heart would race whenever I saw the tour group seated neatly on the bus, laughter and chatter bubbling up as the guide began the introduction. On some nights, even after an exhausting day, I'd sit at my desk and rewrite the entire itinerary, asking myself, if it were me, how would I present this part more engagingly? After more than 4 months of assisting, the company officially hired me. My first tour was for elementary school students, a one-day field trip. The tasks were familiar: organizing the schedule, printing name tags, checking the head count, preparing little gifts for the kids. But this time all eyes would be on me. I was the one in charge. I started planning 3 days in advance, researching the destination, checking the weather forecast, picking games suitable for their age group, even preparing a few fairy tales to tell on the bus. That morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. The warm kitchen light spilled onto my handwritten itinerary, every line neat, every step numbered clearly. I picked out the uniform I'd ironed the night before, dabbed on a bit of lipstick to look more lively. I wanted the children to see an enthusiastic and cheerful tour guide. As the bus began to roll, I stood in front of the microphone, smiling brightly. "Good morning, little explorers. Today we're going to discover a very special place. Are you excited?" A wave of cheers erupted in reply. Round faces, sparkling eyes turned toward me. That look in their eyes. It suddenly reminded me of my younger self, once gazing up at a tour guide with that same sense of wonder. We arrived at 8 a.m. I led the children through the botanical garden, introducing each plant, telling the legends behind the blooming flowers. One little child raised their hand and asked, "Miss, why does this tree have thorns?" "Because even trees want to protect themselves, just like you do." The group laughed. I laughed too. But inside, something warmed. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip, we returned to the bus. I checked every child, making sure everyone was present, everyone was smiling. As I turned to check the back one last time, a tiny boy tugged at my sleeve and slipped a candy into my hand. "This is for you. It's really yummy. Thank you for taking us on this trip." I gently closed my fingers around it, smiling. At that moment, I thought, this must be the sweetest candy I've ever received. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "First official tour. Tired, but happy. Today, I truly got to do my job. Not just introducing a place, but creating a first-time experience for curious little eyes, eager to see the world beyond. I used to be one of them. And now, I'm the one leading the way. Thank you, my dream, for never giving up on me." I often record each of my tour guide days as a way to preserve beautiful memories. Every journey, every group of travelers, each curious glance, each smile or wave goodbye becomes a quiet piece in the path I've chosen to walk. But like any journey in life, not every road is smooth. On a day in July, I was leading a group toward the De Lin Plateau. It was a 3-day tour, and I had double-checked the itinerary in advance. The weather forecast said light sun, no rain. Yet midway up Bao Loc Pass, the driver's phone started ringing non-stop. "There's a landslide ahead," he said, his face tense. I looked toward the foggy road. The latest message from the operations team confirmed, "Serious landslide, road temporarily closed." At that moment, the bus sank into an odd silence. With only the faint crunch of tires on asphalt, my heart started racing. Not because I feared the landslide, but because I knew, from that second on, nothing would go according to plan. I stepped to the middle of the bus, holding the microphone in my right hand, my left gripping the itinerary booklet I had carefully prepared 3 days before, as if it could steady me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "due to some unexpected weather conditions, the pass ahead is currently affected by a landslide. But please don't worry, the driver and I are working with the operations team to find an alternative route. We'll take a 15-minute safety stop at the next station. I'll update you soon after." I tried to smile. A smile that, had there been a mirror in front of me, I probably would have seen how strained it was. Inside me was a storm. How could I find another road? Would the detour be safe? Would it delay us? Would the passengers worry? Was I handling this well enough? I turned back to the front seat and whispered to the driver, "Could you help me check the route through Taoyuan? I remember there's a way, longer, but still passable." He nodded. "Yeah. That road's doable. But lots of sharp turns. Big buses don't go easy. Keep the guests calm, don't let anyone panic." I nodded. As the bus turned onto the detour, the fog deepened and the first steep slope loomed like a test. I told myself, "Don't let anyone see you trembling." I moved through the bus, pointing out wildflowers by the roadside, asking if anyone felt carsick, if any kids wanted snacks, if the passengers in the back would like some music. I became a talking machine for 40 straight minutes, to keep the mood light, and to hold on to my own courage. Truth be told, I was afraid. Afraid the road wouldn't be safe. Afraid I wasn't experienced enough to handle the situation. Afraid of complaints. Afraid of losing the company's trust, or my own. But that day, I learned something. Sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward while your heart is pounding in your chest. 3 hours later, we arrived safely. The guests were fine. No complaints, just laughter as they checked into their rooms. An elderly couple came over and patted my shoulder. "You were calm," the man said. "Well done." I thought something serious had happened. I bowed slightly and thanked them, my lips curling into a smile, a real one this time. That night, I opened my journal again, July 17th. Today I faced my first serious incident while leading a group. Landslide on the pass. Dangerous detour. I was scared inside, but I kept talking to reassure everyone. Maybe I've grown up a little. I'm not just a girl who knows how to tell stories. Bring toys for the kids, or find perfect photo spots for guests anymore. I'm learning how to stay steady when everything falls apart, like a real adult. For the first time, I saw myself as brave. After the landslide incident at Bao Loc Pass, I felt as if I had matured a little more. I no longer thought of being a tour guide as merely smiling and delivering poetic introductions. Behind the stage lights, There stands someone who must always be ready to become a pillar of support amid uncertainty. I continued my work with a new mindset, not just as a storyteller, but as a creator of experiences. And then, on a late afternoon at the end of the month, my manager called me into the office and placed a thick folder in front of me. Prepare a tour for a group of lecturers from the University of Technology. There are 3 professors, 5 associate professors, and a few young lecturers. They're meticulous. Do your best. I brought the folder home and carefully went through every detail: a 3-day itinerary, the destinations, dietary habits, special notes. Inside me was a feeling of both excitement and pressure so intense it was almost suffocating. The University of Technology, the name alone commands admiration. It's where brilliant minds gather, where national-scale research and technology are born. Leading a tour for them, I couldn't afford a single mistake, not even one word out of place. That night, I sat down with a map. I took notes on everything I could about the places we would visit: historical formation, key milestones, cultural and social traits, even little-known anecdotes. I even printed materials in English and French, just in case a lecturer asked for additional insights. For the entire week leading up to the tour, I turned my tiny apartment into a makeshift classroom, maps taped to the walls, practicing presentations in front of a mirror, recording my speech and replaying it like learning a new language. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night, suddenly remembering a detail I hadn't verified yet, and wouldn't go back to sleep until I had confirmed it. I knew I didn't have their academic credentials, but I believed that with a serious attitude and genuine enthusiasm, I wouldn't let anyone down. The tour day began with a crisp early morning. I wore a freshly ironed white shirt, pinned on my name tag, and took one last look in the mirror. My eyes reflected a quiet determination, just like every other time, only this time, deeper, steadier. As the bus set off, I stood at the front, turned on the microphone, and began my welcome speech. My voice trembled slightly, but the focused eyes of the older guests helped me regulate my breathing and smile. I'm Ha Tuet, your tour guide for the next 3 days. Thank you for your trust. I hope this trip will be a pleasant and memorable experience. I began our journey with a short story about the destination, weaving in cultural details, a bit of the local language, and a few carefully memorized legends. Throughout the trip, I devoted myself to explaining every aspect, even responding to tough questions about geological origins, regional planning, or tourism development policies, things I would have stumbled over without thorough preparation. I also kept a close eye on everyone's expressions, knowing when to throw in a light joke to ease the mood, when to pause for photos, and when to gently remind the driver to lower the background music. 3 days flew by in the blink of an eye. As the bus returned to the drop-off point, a silver-haired professor approached me and gently said, "You're very polite and put a lot of heart into this. It's been a long time since I joined a tour where I didn't have to make any corrections." "Thank you." I bowed slightly in thanks, not daring to look up too high, for fear they might see the shimmer of tears in my eyes. That night, I opened my journal again. July 28th, I did it. A tour for the University of Technology lecturers. 3 days without any major errors. I memorized over 40 pages of material, recited every line of introduction, even shared old tales and legends, and they, the learned scholars, nodded in praise. I've touched something called pride. And I realized, effort never betrays me. That bus didn't just take the guests to a new land, it took me to a place lit brightly within myself, where I knew I was on the right path. There was a time when I believed that as long as I had enough passion, I could overcome anything. After the tour with the lecturers from Bach Qua University, I wrote in my journal that I had touched pride with my fingertips. But then, I soon realized, pride isn't the destination. It's just a rest stop on a long and winding road, where headwinds arrive without warning. Everything began with the smallest details. Like that day's trip, our group decided to linger at a roadside cafe with a beautiful photo spot. I gently reminded the tour leader that if we stayed any longer, it would affect the next stop. He nodded and said, "It's fine, let the guests enjoy themselves." So I followed his lead. They laughed. They were happy. I smiled too, but after the tour, the company received complaints. Tour guide didn't follow the schedule and lacked coordination skills. No one remembered that it was the leader who decided to extend the stop. No one asked how I had tried so hard to keep the mood upbeat while rearranging every minute of the itinerary. All that remained was one bold, red phrase: not satisfied. I kept smiling. But this time it wasn't genuine, it was the result of a tired calculation. If I don't smile, they'll think I'm unfriendly. Then there was that time when the company arranged for me to share a room with a male colleague. He was my direct supervisor, and when I hesitantly asked, I was told, "There aren't enough rooms, just bear with it." I couldn't bear it. I didn't want to feel unsafe every night on work trips. I didn't want to close my eyes in a room that wasn't mine, so I paid out of my own pocket to book a small room nearby. It wasn't expensive, but just enough for my heart to stop trembling with every beat. No one knew. I didn't want to tell anyone, only my wallet quietly witnessed itself draining. Trip after trip, I gradually developed the habit of quietly listening to complaints without feeling anything anymore. "Miss, why haven't we eaten yet? We're exhausted." "Miss, why didn't you warn us there would be so much walking?" "Miss, couldn't you have prepared hats for the group?" "Miss, can you call us a taxi?" "Miss." Mississippi, they called me with a voice that was both familiar and distant, as if I wasn't a person with feelings, but just a tool, one that could smile, run errands, and work endlessly. At first, I tried to explain, still gentle, still patient. Later on, I stopped. I just nodded, smiled, and turned away, so no one could see my shoulders slump a little more each time. Every night, I'd sit by the window for a long while. No lights. No music. Just stillness, like a shadow. I once loved this job, loved seeing people happy, loved telling stories, loved traveling everywhere. But now, everything feels different. I don't feel excited anymore. In fact, there are days I feel afraid when I look at the tour schedule. Like a cog in a machine, spinning nonstop, day after day. I don't know if I still love this job. But I do know I've given up too much to quit: my time, my youth, my faith, my dignity, and countless nights alone in unfamiliar rooms, and I don't know what else I could do. A person with little education, no capital, no connections. Can someone like that really start over? Or should I just keep going, wearing a smile that no longer feels like mine? That day, after a tour ended, I was packing when Thursday, an older colleague, came over and sat beside me. She spoke slowly. "I've noticed you don't talk as much lately. Your smile isn't as bright as before. When you first started, your smile was like morning sunshine. Touring with you made the whole group feel lighter. But now, are you okay?" I froze for a moment, staring at my hand gripping the suitcase handle. I smiled faintly and replied, "Maybe I'm just tired." I don't know why my voice sounded so sad. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Maybe I've gotten so used to holding back that I no longer know what truly makes me happy." I still go on tours, still speak clearly, still smile brightly. But that's just the surface. Inside, I'm like a machine, just finishing the job. I miss that flutter in my chest before every trip. Now, my heart still beats, but for nothing at all. I've begun to feel like I'm drifting through each day without leaving a trace behind, waking up in a strange hotel, looking around and not knowing where I am. Standing among crowds at tourist spots in the afternoon, hearing the guests laugh and chat while feeling utterly empty inside, as if I'm standing outside my own body. At night, I stare at the mirror for a long time, trying to find the face that belongs to me. But the longer I look, the more unfamiliar it feels. Every day, I still do everything a tour guide is supposed to do. Plan the itinerary, call ahead to confirm meals, check the rest stops, prepare entrance tickets, rehearse each line of commentary. I make no mistakes, cause no conflicts, break no rules. I am the ideal employee, but no longer someone who feels truly alive. Once, I was on a 3-day tour. On the final day, an elderly guest held my hand and smiled kindly. "Have you been doing this long? You look so young, but you're such a good guide. Your voice is very pleasant." It's been a long time since we've had this much fun on a tour. I bowed and thanked them, using my usual gentle tone. But when I stepped into the bus, my eyes stung, not because I was touched, but because I realized I no longer felt joy. Even praise didn't move me anymore. That scared me. the numbness growing inside, I started avoiding long tours. Using needing rest as an excuse, I declined the more complicated trips. Once, I took 3 days off and just stayed home, not doing anything, just lying there, staring at the ceiling, asking myself, if one day I quit this job, would anyone even notice? I used to think being a tour guide was part of who I was. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe it was just a shell I've worn for too long, so long that I don't even know what else to wear if I were to take it off. One night, I dreamed I turned into a narrow path shrouded in fog, no lights, no signs. I kept walking and walking, my legs growing weary, with no idea where I was going. When I woke up, cold sweat soaked the back of my shirt. My heart was racing. Outside, it was still dark. I haven't told anyone about these things, not because I'm strong, but because I don't know where to begin. The people who know me still think I love this job, still see my check-ins in different places, still message me, saying, "Tuet, you're living your dream." I just smile, nod vaguely. I don't dare tell them, the dream is gone, only habit and duty remain. Perhaps the most frightening thing isn't failure, but continuing forward, even when you no longer feel anything. Tonight, I sit by the window again, writing in my journal, under the dim light of a small rental room somewhere in central Vietnam. The sound of traffic hums faintly in the distance. I write slowly, each word wrung from the heart. I'm alive, but sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm truly living. I used to dream of so many things, but now, even opening a dream feels exhausting. I don't want to quit this job, but I also don't know how to love it the way I used to. There are nights like this, when sorrow doesn't scream, it simply seeps in, quietly, coldly, and without end. This year, Lunar New Year arrived slowly. Or perhaps I've been living too fast, so even when things arrive on time, they feel out of season. I booked my ticket home for the 28th of Tet. As I pulled my suitcase out of the bus station gate, the chilly air hit my face, suddenly reminding me of childhood Tet holidays, when just a new pair of shoes from mom could bring joy for an entire week. Now, I stood there in an expensive coat, feeling colder than the northern winds of December. Mom greeted me at the gate, just like every year, with that same gentle look. "It's good you're home. I've cooked your favorite dishes. Tonight, we'll go to your uncle's for the year-end dinner. Everyone's asking about you." I nodded and smiled faintly. She didn't know that all I wanted was to stay home, alone, hiding behind the excuse of work commitments. The year-end dinner took place in the familiar house, with old furniture and the TV murmuring a New Year's program. I sat in a corner, picking at my food quietly, not speaking. Relatives gathered, chatting and laughing, asking about children and jobs. I felt invisible, until I heard words that cut sharply. A cousin spoke up, her voice casual and loud. "What kind of girl travels all the time with all sorts of men? Doesn't know how to keep herself. That job, dressing fancy. Talking slick, what kind of profession is that?" Another chimed in, "Exactly. An unmarried woman always here and there, no roots. Has any tour guide ever married a decent man? My aunt's daughter used to work in tourism, she's divorced now." I looked up at them. No one noticed I was there. Maybe they thought I couldn't hear. Or worse, they didn't care if I did. I quietly set down my chopsticks, stood up, and turned to Mom, speaking softly so only she could hear. "I won't be going to Grandma and Grandpa's this year. I'm tired." Then I left the dinner, stepping outside as the wind picked up. I walked back to our old house, my heart hollow like a box with its bottom cut out. Under the pale yellow streetlights, I pulled my scarf tighter, not because of the cold, but to hold myself together, to keep from falling apart. I stayed home for a few more days. Each morning, I woke early to help Mom cook, wash vegetables, and prepare offerings. I still smiled, chatted with neighbors, wrapped bonchung like every year. But inside, I was just an empty shell, trying to see how much of my real self remained. On the 5th day of the new year, as I packed my suitcase to return to the city, Mom sat beside me, folding the clothes I had just packed. She didn't look at me, just said, "Tuet, I think you should reconsider your career. You're 27 now. Other girls your age have 2 kids already. Your job keeps you away all the time, who would want to marry that? Maybe take a break, focus on settling down." I stayed silent. Not angry. Not defensive. I just looked down at my hands, the same hands that had held a microphone for thousands of hours, waved to hundreds of tour groups, now trembling because of a single sentence from Mom. Not because she was wrong, but because she voiced what I had feared for so long. Yes. I'm nearly 30. Still alone. In a job that's unstable, lacks prestige, and isn't respected like being a doctor, teacher, or civil servant. The only thing I once had, passion, has faded like the last light of winter. I lowered my head and softly replied, yes. I'll think about it. Then I hugged Mom tightly, as if it were the last time I could be her little girl. Because starting tomorrow, I'd have to truly grow up. Whether I wanted to or not, the bus pulled out of the station on the afternoon of the 6th day. I sat by the window, watching the low hills fade away, disappearing behind the curves of the road. I knew I was no longer the girl who once eagerly returned home for Tet. Nor was I the passionate tour guide of those early years. I was becoming something in between. Someone adrift. Between youth and adulthood. Between ideals and reality. Between dreams and surrender, and I'm afraid that one day, I'll feel nothing at all, neither when I leave, nor when I return. I returned to the city in a fine rain, the streets were slick with water, and people huddled beneath umbrellas. The bus station was crowded, yet I felt as though I were standing alone in a desert, where no one knows anyone, and no one calls anyone by name. My rented room was just the same. A tiny space, barely enough for one person, and just enough for me to tuck all my emotions into a corner and lock them away. The dim yellow light cast shadows on the wall, and mine spread out like it was drifting away from me. It felt like I was alive. But not truly living. I returned to work after Tet with a face already accustomed to hiding sadness. Still the same smile, the same brisk pace, the same clear voice each time I stood before a group of tourists. But inside, I was like an old machine, running on a preset program. No more joy, no more excitement in preparing for the trips, no more desire to connect. Just going, working, smiling, returning, turning off the lights, lying down, opening my eyes, and beginning again. I remember one time, after finishing a 3-day 2-night tour in the Central Highlands. The entire group was very pleased. The group leader sent a long message of praise, and the tourists left 5-star reviews on the company's fan page. Things like that used to make me happy for a whole week. But that time, I just sat on the bus back to the city, staring blankly out the window. I felt nothing. As if all my joy had been worn down after months of pushing myself to endure. As time went on, I spoke less and less. With colleagues, I simply nodded. With clients, I smiled and turned away quickly. I feared someone looking me in the eye, as if just one glance would shatter me. I don't know how many times I cried in hotel bathrooms. I don't even remember how many nights I fell asleep still wearing my uniform. Without taking off my makeup, without eating dinner, I often dreamt of getting lost. In a crowded airport, a bustling market, a packed square. But no one noticed me. No one called my name. Some nights, I would sit down to write in my journal, my handwriting tilted and uneven. Who am I? Do I still want anything at all? Then I'd stop. The page stays blank. My heart, too. One of my colleagues, someone I used to go on tours with when I first started, asked me out for coffee at a roadside cafe. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "You're not yourself anymore. Your smile used to light up the whole tour group. Now when you smile, there's nothing behind your eyes. Are you okay?" I smiled. The usual answer, "I guess I'm just tired, sis. Working too much makes you numb." But I knew, I wasn't just tired. I was burned out. One evening, I got off work early. A light rain began to fall. I didn't go straight back to my room, but stood outside the gate of a park, once a lively place. Now only a few couples were huddled under the eaves, avoiding the drizzle. I stood there, not for any reason. I just didn't want to go back to that room, the place where I'd have to face myself. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, scrolled from top to bottom. No one to call. A lover? I had none. Close friends? I'd lost almost all my connections after years of constant touring. Family? My mother now only asked one question: when are you going to quit your job and get married? I locked the screen and put my phone away. Then bowed my head and cried, right there in the drizzle. I didn't know what exactly I had lost. Only that I no longer loved my job. I no longer felt the spark in those early morning departures. No longer felt joy when introducing a new destination to travelers. I was existing, not out of passion, but because I didn't know what other path I could take. Loneliness is when you feel alone in the crowd. Despair is when every path looks like a dead end, but you don't have the courage to turn back. And I was caught somewhere in between. I once thought I was strong. I once believed that if I tried hard enough, worked hard enough, and stayed kind enough, the world would treat me gently, but this city isn't gentle. And the world doesn't wait for anyone, especially not girls from the countryside who come to the city with bright eyes and backpacks full of dreams. I started having nightmares every night. The same dreams over and over. I was lost, I fell off a cliff, I called someone and no one picked up. One night, I dreamt I was sitting in a large auditorium, surrounded by hundreds of people laughing while I cried. I made no sound. And no one looked at me. I woke up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, but the next morning, I still put on lipstick, wore my uniform dress, and stepped onto the tour bus with a professional smile. I'm a tour guide. I have to be cheerful. I have to make people love life. I have to smile, even when I'm dead inside. I began to lose all feelings. My favorite songs sounded like noise. The food I once craved had no taste. I no longer wanted to sleep, go outside, wear makeup, or talk to anyone. Everything became a task, including living. I lived like a shadow. Every day felt like a carbon copy of the one before. I smiled because I had to. I talked because I was afraid someone might ask, "Are you okay?" Because if I ever answered honestly, I was afraid I'd fall apart completely. The unraveling began on a tour with a new colleague. Her name was Lynn, a fresh graduate with sparkling eyes and a voice full of enthusiasm. Lynn reminded me of myself 3 years ago, when I first arrived in Saigon, carefree, dreamy, ready to work overtime, smiling at everyone from rice stall servers to hotel security guards. One night, while waiting for customers to finish dinner, Lynn said, "Chiha Tuet, you smile a lot, but your eyes look really sad. Are you okay?" I laughed, quickly replying, "You must be mistaken. I'm the happiest one in the office." Lynn went quiet for a moment, then gently said, "When I was in school, I read about something called smiling depression. People still go to work, still socialize, still laugh. But inside, they feel completely empty. I don't mean to be nosy. I just think, if you're too tired, it's okay to stop trying so hard." I forced a smile and changed the subject, but that night, I looked it up. Smiling depression. No one knows. No one sees. The person wakes up early, puts on makeup, holds intelligent conversations, goes to work. But every day is a battle. And sometimes, all it takes is one small sentence to make them fall apart. The day I completely broke down, there were no tears, no blades, no pills. Just one afternoon, I was walking home after a shift. The sun was scorching. I passed by an unfinished construction site and instinctively looked up at the raw concrete floors, then stood there for a long time. I didn't intend to jump. But I understood why some people choose to end things there. It's not because they want to die. It's because they no longer have a reason to live. I stood there for a long while. No one stopped me. No one asked how I was. I walked away in silence, went home, opened my phone, and messaged Lynn, "Do you know any therapists?" That was the first time in my life I admitted I needed help. I went to the clinic on a Saturday morning. Sitting in a row of pale gray chairs, surrounded by people who looked just as frail and hollow-eyed as I did. Everyone had their own reasons for being there, but we all shared one thing: none of us wanted to pretend to be okay anymore. When the therapist asked me the first question, "What has made you feel the worst recently?" I burst into tears. I didn't even know what I was crying for. Maybe it was because I had spent so many months trying to heal myself, pulling myself out of bed, pretending to be cheerful. And now, for the first time, I was allowed not to be okay. I told the therapist about working 18-hour shifts. About falling asleep on the floor from exhaustion. About the silent night buses. About my mother calling each week just to remind me to get married. About always being the one responsible, the one cheerful, the one who's always fine in everyone's eyes. And then, I wasn't fine anymore. This city used to be my dream. Being a tour guide used to be my pride. But it was also this city, this job, that swallowed me whole, not because they were cruel, but because I didn't know how to stop when I was already breaking. I ran too fast, too far. And lost myself along the way. I don't know when I'll be okay again. But at least, this time, I've decided to stop pretending. After that doctor's visit, I took a week off. For the first time in 3 years of working, I dared to ask for leave, not because I had a fever or my tour dates overlapped, but because I didn't want to fall any deeper. I deleted the work apps, muted all the tour guide chat groups, even blocked the numbers of the coordinators who always called at noon. I just lay there. Some days, I fell asleep in the afternoon and didn't wake until the next morning. Some days, I lay motionless, staring at the ceiling until darkness fell, and forgot to eat. I even typed out a resignation letter. I just didn't have the courage to send it yet. After all, this place used to be a dream. Eventually, I decided to submit the letter. But I wasn't surprised when the team leader immediately called me. Can you help me lead one last tour this weekend? It's a tough one to assign. Mountain hiking. But it's a gentle route, nothing rushed. After this, you can rest. I promise I won't stop you. I hesitated. He added, the group's all older people, over 50, one lady's even in her 60s. We need someone experienced and calm. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe I wasn't ready to leave that busy life behind so suddenly. Or maybe, deep down, I still had some lingering affection for the job. The mountain wasn't steep, but it required endurance to reach the top. The sky was clear, the breeze cool. The group only had 8 members, all middle-aged, friendly, and gentle. No one asked me to say much, they just smiled kindly. You just walk at the back, in case one of us slips. I nodded. For the first time in months, I led a tour in peace and silence. I walked through the forest, listening to the wind and birdsong. I saw sunlight filtering through the leaves. No microphone, no feedback, no deadlines, no phones ringing my name. It felt like I was myself again. Among them, one person caught my attention, Mr. Huyen Vong. In his 30s, tall, wearing sunglasses, walking quietly beside an elderly lady who, I later learned, was his grandmother. During a break, I asked softly, "Are you part of this group?" He nodded, removed one earbud, and replied in a slightly hoarse voice, "Not exactly. My grandmother loves hiking, no one can stop her, so I came to watch over her." I was surprised. A city man, clearly busy and juggling work with Bluetooth calls, yet he gave up his whole weekend just to ensure his grandmother's safety. I felt a kind of warmth, a warmth I hadn't felt in any relationship for a long time. When we reached the summit, there was a flat rock area for resting and taking photos. I sat beside his grandmother and handed her a bottle of water. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "You led a tour for the Polytechnic University a few years back, didn't you?" I froze. I remembered. Back then, I was just starting out, leading a group of elderly professors to Dalat for a conference. I was still radiant, cheerful, laughing through the whole tour, knowing every detail of each destination. She had been one of the few who chatted with me often. I nodded and smiled faintly. "You remember, ma'am?" I didn't think I left much of an impression. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "You were glowing back then. But now, your eyes hold a sadness no young person should carry." I clenched the water bottle tightly. My throat caught. But maybe because of the mountain air, or because I believed I'd never see her again, I said, "I used to really love this job. But now, I feel like it doesn't love me back." She stayed silent. I continued, as if a dam had burst. I thought that if I just kept trying, things would get better. But the harder I tried, the lonelier I felt. Even when I smiled, I felt exhausted. She nodded gently. She didn't pry or lecture, just told me stories from her youth, when the country was still struggling. And she was among the first to teach at a university. She had wanted to quit countless times, she said. Some people aren't made for quiet lives. They need a few breakdowns, a few bruises and scrapes before they find their reason to keep going. And I understood. She wasn't telling me to return to work. She was saying, if you're exhausted, it's okay to stop. But if there's still a flicker of faith left, don't let it go out completely. On the way back down, she accidentally slipped. I was the closest and managed to catch her before her head hit a rock. Her leg was bruised, but thankfully it wasn't serious. That was when Mr. Huyen Vong finally took off his earbud, ran over, stared at me for a long moment, and bowed his head in gratitude. We didn't talk much after that. But on the bus back, he sat beside me, hesitantly handed over his phone. Could I get your number? Just to treat you to a meal. As a thank you for saving my grandmother. I looked at his phone. Then out the window, at the forested hills fading into the distance. Maybe after all these dark months, I should try something new. Or at the very least, stop shutting everyone out. I typed in my number. For the first time in a long while, I wanted to be contacted. And so, that final tour turned out to be the very first step toward finding myself again. After that hiking tour, I really quit my job. This time, it was for real. I didn't hesitate when I clicked send on my resignation letter. There were no tears, no regrets. Just a gentle letting go, like someone finally finding shelter after walking too long in the rain. A few days later, Huyen Vong texted me, my grandma misses you. Come have rice porridge with us sometime, okay? I laughed. A clumsy but unexpectedly endearing invitation. We met a few times after that. Just coincidences. Or pretend coincidences. Once at a cafe near my house, where he claimed he often worked because it's close to a partner's office. Another time at a bookstore. I was reading a book on cognitive behavioral therapy, and he happened to ask, do you like Murakami? Then one rainy afternoon, he stood outside my therapy center holding an umbrella, didn't ask what I was doing in there, just quietly held the umbrella over me and said, you have the right to feel sad. But don't go through the storm alone. I broke down crying right then. In the middle of the street, under that umbrella, as if he'd just cast a spell that shattered the ice that had sealed my heart for months. We weren't officially in love. It was something lighter than love, yet deeper than friendship. He was the first person in years I dared to open up to about my smiling depression, that illness where you smile on the outside, but inside you're as empty as a dried-up well. I told him, I used to want to disappear. Not die. Just stop existing. He didn't lecture me. Didn't rush to console me. He just gently squeezed my hand. If you want to sit still, I'll sit with you. If you want to walk, I'll go with you. And he really did, during a spontaneous trip to Hoi An that he booked before I could even say, no, you don't have to. Hoi An wasn't as beautiful as I remembered. But this time, I saw it differently, through the eyes of someone who once wanted to leave everything behind, but eventually chose to stay. We wandered the old town together. I no longer wore a tour guide hat, no longer held a mic, and didn't need to talk about the history of each house. I just shared my memories with him, about the first student group I led there, the time I got lost in the rain, or that time a guest mocked me for not knowing all the architectural styles. He listened like he was reading a rare book. Then said, you should go back to that job. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to live true to the passion you once had. I thought about it for a long time. But one morning, I woke up missing the feeling of holding my name badge, of entering hotels early to arrange, of hearing guests laugh at a small local food fact I shared. I knew I was ready to return. The first day back, I was nervous. My hands trembled a bit holding the mic, even though my smile remained professionally steady. That evening, just after the tour ended, I opened my phone to see a message: "I'm waiting at the alley. There's hot soup and rice. Come home and eat." He wasn't a good cook. But as I ate the slightly burnt fried egg and the overly seasoned jute leaf soup, I felt an odd sense of luck. Some days when I came home early, I cooked for him. We didn't live together, but on my off days, I took care of him, this man who carried the weight of endless deadlines, who had his own struggles, yet always saved a quiet space of peace just for me. We weren't romantic in the I love you every day kind of way. But on the way he'd come pick me up at the bus station when my tour ran late. In how he sat through hours helping me fix a hotel booking mistake for a Korean group. In the way he looked at me when I smiled genuinely for the first time in a while, after a little child in the group hugged me and said thank you. Once, I told him, what I thought was the bottom of disappointment turned out to be just the beginning of finding myself again. He gently nodded and replied, "Thank you for not giving up. And thank you for letting me in. I've never clearly said I love you." Neither has he. But I know, if one day I fall again, he'll still be there, reaching out his hand and saying, "Let's keep going. Don't be afraid." I once asked Huyen Vong, "Why are you always so calm?" He smiled, took a sip of hot tea, and said, "Because I've lost too much. I don't want to lose anything else." At first, I thought it was just a beautiful way of speaking, like a line from a melancholic movie. Until I learned the truth. Huyen Vong was born into an intellectual family, originally from the north but who migrated south after 1975. His father was a renowned architect. His mother is a lecturer in classical literature. Their family used to be called model, disciplined, educated, as serene as a lake in the early morning, but lakes don't stay calm forever, and that peaceful home began to crack when he was 17. His mother developed depression after losing their second child, his only younger sister, in a car accident when she was just 12. She had always been a sensitive and loving woman, but the pain of losing her daughter made her withdraw from the world. He told me, there were nights his mother would sit alone in the living room, staring at photos of his sister, whispering as if talking to someone still alive. He tried to pull her out of that room, unsuccessfully. He even tried taking her to a therapist. She just smiled and said, "I'm not crazy. I'm just sad." His father, then, buried himself in work. And later had an affair. The divorce happened when Huyen Vong was 20. That was when everything completely fell apart. He juggled university with taking care of his mother, all while bearing the psychological weight of being the man of the house, a role society expects to always be strong and resilient. It wasn't until he had a stable job that his mother finally agreed to take medication. But just as her depression began to ease, she was diagnosed with early-stage cancer. "Life seems to enjoy testing us with curveballs," he chuckled. "I's not bitter, just tired." I was speechless as he told me all this. He spoke so softly, yet every word felt like it scraped across my skin, raw and deep. I asked, "Who was there for you all those years?" He smiled, "No one. Just. There were things I couldn't let go of. Like my mother, my sister. And myself." Maybe that's why he understands me so well. He doesn't panic when I cry without reason. Don't get annoyed when I disappear for 3 days without answering my phone. Don't judge when I talk about the time I thought of ending everything. Because he stood at that edge before. And he came back. One night, I woke up to the sound of rain and a dream where I was lost in a forest, calling out with no one answering. I jolted up, grabbed my phone, and typed, "Are you still awake?" Not even 30 seconds later, he replied, "Look out the window." He was standing outside my house, rain soaking his shirt, holding an umbrella. "How long have you been here?" "Since you messaged me, are you still awake?" I wanted to cry. Not because he waited, but because I realized someone chose to wait for me, even when I never promised I'd come back. In the days that followed, he taught me how to care for the bonsai tree his mother left behind. He took me to small eateries he used to frequent as a student. He told me stories about his late sister, how she loved painting ceramic figures and once dreamed of becoming a tour guide. "Maybe if she were still alive," he said, "she'd be like you. she'd laugh a lot, hide her sadness, and find a job where she tells stories through journeys. I gently replied, taking his hand, I'll tell her story for her. And mine too. Huyen Vong isn't the kind of man who makes grand promises. He doesn't say flowery things, but through every action, he shows me, love doesn't always need words. Sometimes, love is simply someone staying, even when you're not sure you're still someone worth staying for. The first international tour I led again was an 8-day, 7-night journey to Japan, right during cherry blossom season. There was a moment when I stood beneath the blooming trees, feeling the gentle breeze sweep through my thin coat, holding in my hand the guide badge I had once tucked deep into a drawer. I truly smiled, a light, effortless smile. It felt like I had finally come home. Not to a destination, but to myself. Huyen Vong took a leave of absence to join the tour, claiming it was to support the travel company's media coverage. But I knew, he simply wanted to be by my side. When I was exhausted after a full day with the group, he would go out late to get me a bento box, wait until I returned, then sit and eat with me even though he had already had dinner. When I had to revise the itinerary due to last-minute requests from clients, he quietly texted me Japanese translations to help coordinate with local partners. I used to fear returning to this profession, afraid of the loneliness in every airport, hotel, and unfamiliar harbor. But this time, as I looked over my shoulder and saw him walking behind me, carrying a large suitcase, his wide-brimmed hat tilted lazily toward the sun, I understood, I was no longer alone. The trip ended on a chilly afternoon in Kyoto. I had a free day before flying home, and Huyen Vong took me to Kiyomizudera Garden, where an ancient bell overlooks the city bathed in sunset. He said he had wanted to bring me here for a long time. You know, he said as we sat on the stone steps, this is where Japanese people come to pray for lasting bonds. I smiled, just about to reply when he knelt on one knee and pulled out a small box from his coat pocket. Tuet. I once watched my mother fade away in loneliness. I saw my sister leave this world before she even knew how to live. And then I met you, like a symphony I never dared to hope I could hear in full. But if you say yes, from now on, you'll never have to walk alone on any journey again. Will you marry me? I didn't cry like they do in the movies. I just sat silently, looked deep into his eyes, and nodded. And in that moment, I knew, this was the final destination every journey of mine had been leading to. The early days of our marriage were so peaceful they could bring one to tears. He worked from home more often, moved projects away from the city center. I continued guiding tours, but I became selective, only taking on journeys truly worth telling, not for revenue or quotas. In the mornings, he made breakfast. I brewed sugar-free coffee. At noon, he'd nap on the sofa, while I edited articles about my latest trips. In the evenings, I read books under a warm yellow light, while he sat across from me reading emails, occasionally looking up to smile at me. When I was away on tours, he sent me a message each day, sometimes with a photo of my favorite milk tea, or the stray cat that used to visit when I lived alone. When he traveled for work, I waited at the airport, bringing a thick coat even though I knew he'd say he wasn't cold. We didn't promise forever. We simply learned to care for each other, in the smallest details, every single day. No one had to try alone anymore. No more long nights in silence with no one to text. No more smiling to hide tears, or saying I'm fine when everything was falling apart. If someone asked, is marriage as beautiful as people say? I wouldn't answer right away. I'd show them a photo of me, in messy pajamas, asleep at my desk. And Huyen Vong, gently draping a blanket over me, his eyes as if the whole world had narrowed down to just this one woman. Marriage is beautiful, if you find someone who sees you as home. I once believed that love alone was enough. But it wasn't. Our marriage began with laughter, warm dinners, and nights whispering about a child who would carry both our bloodlines. But as time passed, work took over. And everything began to change. I continued working as a tour guide, now on more high-end, farther-reaching tours, with heavier responsibilities. Some months, I was home for only 6 or 7 days, the rest spent in hotels, airports, and midnight Zoom calls. As for Huyen Vong, after his mother passed and his father moved abroad with another family, He poured himself into a startup in educational technology. He often came home past 10 p.m., eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights drafting proposals. I would just watch him from afar, too afraid to ask anything. We started fighting over the smallest things. I was upset he forgot my tour schedule, not even a text during my 3-day trip to Malaysia. He was angry I changed my flight without telling him, leaving him waiting 2 hours at the freezing airport. The closer we lived, the farther we drifted. What had once been endearing, my independence, his meticulousness, our patience, turned into reasons to hurt each other. I felt abandoned. He felt misunderstood. Then I got pregnant. That time felt like a sliver of light breaking into a dim room. He took me to every checkup, learned how to cook nutritious porridge, and even designed a baby room in soft white and pastel blue. We told ourselves, it'll be different once the baby comes. But we were wrong. After our son was born, life became a never-ending chaos. I had a C-section and stayed in the hospital for a week. My milk hasn't come in, the baby cried all night, and I couldn't sleep. He cradled our child with one arm, laptop balanced on the other, racing to meet a deadline. We were both exhausted. We tried for the first year. But when our son turned 3, right when it was time to apply for preschool, we realized we had nothing left to give. I was away on a 10-day international tour. He had a major conference in Singapore on our son's first school day. Neither of us wanted to give up our work. Neither of us backed down. Neither of us was truly at fault. But it had been too long since either of us paused to ask what the other truly needed. One day, I sat at the dining table, watching our son nibble on a slice of bread, strawberry jam smudged on his chubby cheeks. The living room was quiet, just the soft hum of the AC. Huyen Vuong was upstairs, in yet another important online meeting. And I suddenly broke down. I was tired. I was sad. I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. I wasn't Ha Tuet, the girl who once smiled under the rain, who blogged about her journeys to the world, who dared to quit a job after one sleepless night because the tour felt meaningless. Who was I now? A clumsy mother. A failed wife. A woman who no longer knew what she wanted. We decided to divorce that autumn. No yelling. No blame. Just one night after dinner, I said, I can't take this anymore. And he quietly replied, me neither. The court proceedings were swift. We divided custody. He rented a place near the preschool. I moved back to my old apartment, the one I lived in when I was single. For the first time in years, I felt quiet inside. Not hurt. Not relieved. Just empty. I still loved him. And I believe he still loved me, but love, in the end, isn't what keeps two people together for life. It takes understanding. It takes showing up. It takes commitment. And sacrifice. We loved each other. But we forgot how to hold on. My son no longer lives with me. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. But I knew it was the right one. After the divorce, I wasn't strong enough to be a stable support for him. My job as a tour guide was unpredictable, unstable income, erratic hours, and those long, empty nights made me lose faith even in myself. Huyen Vuong was different. He had a home, a steady administrative job, and the calmness I had lost long ago. We agreed our son would live with him during the week. Weekends, those would be mine. Every Saturday morning, I wake up earlier than usual. Brew a cup of jasmine tea. Prepare some snacks, and wait for my son in front of the old apartment building, once the place where I dreamed of a peaceful family. My son, now 4.5, runs into my arms with a bright laugh. Mommy Tuet, where are we going today? We are not a traditional family. But we are companions. I started guiding children's tours again, nature walks, museums, countryside farms. Every trip was filled with kids his age, and I was the guide, while my son blended into the group as the sweetest little guest. He picked out his own clothes, carried a green dinosaur backpack, and always held my hand tightly when crossing the. One time, I took the kids to a farm on the outskirts of the city. In the middle of a sunflower field, I turned around and saw him whispering something to a little girl, pointing at me. That's my mom. She knows everything about plants. I stood there, silent. And I realized, happiness doesn't have to be extravagant. I still remember the emptiness after the divorce. Without my son beside me, the room felt dead quiet. I cooked less, stopped humming while washing dishes, and every night was filled only with the sound of dripping water. It was a time when I wasn't really living, just existing, but then I realized, I still had my child. Just in a different way. I'm not a perfect mother. But I can be a kind one. The kind who tells fairy tales every weekend, explains the difference between moss and lichen on rocks, and listens to stories about a big ant that climbed on a girl's leg during the trip. I also started learning how to love myself again. Not the kind with bright red lipstick or sunrise yoga, though I tried those, too. But the kind that forgives myself for failing in my marriage. For once thinking about leaving everything behind. Now, I live slowly, work just enough, and love my son with the best time I have to offer. One time, when Vaughn texted me, he told me, "Mommy is a superhero, because she leads the whole group and never gets lost." I read that message, smiled for a long time and replied, "Because Mommy has a compass. And she's also learning how to find her own way." Sometimes, on Sunday nights when I return him to his father's house, I stand quietly at the gate. Watch him run inside, laughing, then turn back to wave, "Don't forget to pick me up next weekend, okay?" I always nod. And in that moment, I understand, divorce isn't a full stop. It's a comma, so I can continue writing the next chapters of being a mother, of being an independent woman, in my own way. I once thought, when my son started first grade, I would feel relieved. That at least I had tried my best to fulfill the role of a mother, even if I didn't live with him every day. But the truth was quite the opposite. When he began having a packed schedule, lessons, extracurricular activities, group assignments, small tests, my precious weekends gradually shrank. I could no longer take him wandering around like before, no more just grab the backpack and go with him. One time, I asked him, "If Mommy goes away for a while, would you be mad at me?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head, "As long as you don't disappear like in cartoons." I laughed and hugged him tight. I won't disappear. I'm just continuing my journey. I left the city a month later. Moved to a small seaside town in the south. A place where no one knew who I was, where everything moved so slowly you could hear the wind tapping on the window screens each afternoon. No skyscrapers, no neon lights, no deadlines, no takeaway coffee, just the smell of salt from the sea, kids playing soccer under the sunset, and red dirt roads stretching all the way to the seawall. I rented a small wooden house next to a little restaurant run by an elderly couple. Every morning, I walked along the beach, capturing every shade of the sky changing, every child fishing, every old man untangling his nets, every tiny story nobody else told. I started making my first videos, no fancy effects. No intense music, just life. As it really was. And I posted them online. To my surprise, people watched. And then many people watched. The first comments appeared, "You tell stories like you're reading a diary. Thank you for this early morning video. I'd been depressed, and it made me smile. Can life really slow down like this?" I became a travel blogger, but one who told stories through images and feelings, rather than check-ins or reviews. Some called me the storyteller of the sea. I found it funny, but also comforting, as if someone finally understood me. 2 years later, I decided to leave the island. No reason left to stay, that journey had healed me. It was enough. Returning to the city on a gentle rainy morning, I visited my son. The woman who opened the door wasn't me. She had a warm smile, her hair tied back, and a gentle look when she called my son by name. I already knew, from the vague stories my son told me over the phone, from the unfamiliar scent clinging to his clothes whenever he came back. I stood quietly for a moment. She understood, stepped back, and let me hold him. My son looked up and whispered, "Are you jealous, Mom?" I shook my head. "I know you're happy, and that's enough." That night, I stayed in the city. But the next day, I flew away. Another journey began, around the world. From every place I visited, I sent gifts home to my son. A small volcanic rock from Iceland. A handwritten letter from Santorini. A wooden doll from Japan. A pastel drawing bought from a street stall in Florence. My son has a big box named Mom's Journey Box. Every time I call him on video, he picks something from the box and asks, "Where did you get this, Mom? What were you thinking then?" We are still mother and son. But also two companions on two different journeys. I travel to understand the world, and he grows up to understand me. I once feared losing my place in his heart. But now I understand, love doesn't have to mean being together every day to exist. It only needs you to be persistent, sincere, and never disappear from the other person's heart. My life now is made up of unplanned journeys, flights taken without reason. I no longer have the concept of a near future, because now, I live fully in the present every single day. That feeling of relief, no longer rushing to catch up with someone, no longer waiting for something, no longer hoping for something beyond my control. I know life always moves in its own way, and I choose not to resist anymore. I simply walk, letting the wind guide me. After traveling around the world, I decided to stay for a while in a few places, Europe, Asia, even Africa, not to settle down long term, but to explore every nook and cranny, every story of different countries. I learned to live in small rooms with dim light, listen to the waves crashing outside as dawn breaks, surrender myself to the chilly autumn breeze, or breathe in the warm air of the tropics. Some days, I walked with a French guy through the ancient streets of Paris, dined under the soft glow of lamps, listening to him talk about distant travels and dreams that never came true. I made no promises, no fantasies about a future with him. We were simply two people living fully in the moment. Part of a vast world where no one knows where the final stop will be. Some nights, I drank wine with an Italian guy under the starry sky of Venice. It felt like I was part of an eternal love story, even if only for fleeting moments. But I knew that wasn't what I needed. I wasn't searching for a permanent place or any promises. I just wanted freedom, and to love myself. I still remember those dream trips, where there were no responsibilities or obligations, where I was just myself, the storyteller behind my camera lens. And if someone appeared along the way, I would smile, share a little emotion with them, but expect nothing. That is how I live, and that is how I love myself, every day. I share my story online, where strangers I've never met write words of encouragement. They admire me for the beautiful photos of life from all over the world, for my writings about freedom and endless journeys. I have become part of a travel community unbound, independent of anyone or anything. I go, and I live, in a world without ties, without promises about the future. I don't belong to anyone, nor do I need to wait for anyone. The roads I travel are mine, the dreams I chase are mine. And if someone crosses my path, if fate allows, I will pause for a moment and share brief fragments of life. My journey, through these travels, will continue.